diplomatique. Et pour l'Europe, et cela après plusieurs semaines d'action diplomatique.
Diplomatic action. I know you are legitimately concerned about the historic events underway, who are shaking up the world order. The war in Ukraine, which has resulted in almost 1 million deaths and injuries, continues unabated. The United States of America, our ally, has changed its position on this war, is less supportive of Ukraine, and is casting doubt on what will happen next. At the same time, the same United States of America intends to impose tariffs on products from Europe. Last but not least, the world continues to become ever more brutal, and the threat of terrorism continues unabated. All in all, our prosperity and security have become more uncertain, and it has to be said that we are entering a new era.
Sont devenues plus incertaines, et il faut bien le dire, nous rentrons dans une nouvelle ère.
The war in Ukraine has now been going on for over 3 years. From day one, we decided to support Ukraine and sanction Russia. And rightly so, for it is not only the Ukrainian people who are courageously fighting for their freedom, but also our own security that is under threat. Indeed, if one country can invade its neighbor in Europe with impunity, then nobody can be sure of anything anymore. And it's the law of the strongest that applies.
Et c'est la loi du plus fort qui s'applique, et la paix ne peut plus être garantie sur notre continent même. L'histoire nous l'a enseigné. Au-delà de l'Ukraine, la menace russe est là.
And peace can no longer be guaranteed on our own continent. History has taught us this. Beyond Ukraine, the Russian threat is there, and it affects the countries of Europe. Russia has already turned the Ukrainian conflict into a global one. It has mobilized North Korean soldiers and Iranian equipment on our continent, while helping these countries to further arm themselves.
Manipule les élections en Roumanie, en Moldavie. Elle organise des attaques numériques contre nos hôpitaux pour en bloquer le fonctionnement.
President Putin's Russia is violating our borders to assassinate opponents, manipulating elections in Romania and Moldavia. It organizes digital attacks on our hospitals to block their operations. Russia is trying to manipulate our opinions with lies spread on social networks. Deep down, it tests our limits, and does so in the air, at sea, in space, and behind our screens.
De son budget à cette fin. D'ici 2030, elle prévoit d'encore accroître son armée, d'avoir 300 000 soldats supplémentaires, 3 000 chars, 300 avions de chasse de plus. Qui peut donc croire, dans ce contexte?
This aggressiveness seems to know no bounds, and at the same time Russia continues to rearm, spending over 40% of its budget for this purpose. By 2030, it plans to further expand its army, adding 300,000 soldiers, 3,000 tanks, and 300 fighter jets. In this context, who can believe that today's Russia will stop at Ukraine?
Mais la situation que je vous décris est celle-là, et nous devons faire avec. Alors face à ce monde de danger, rester spectateur serait une folie.
Russia has become, as I speak and for years to come, a threat to France and Europe. I deeply regret this, and I am convinced that in the long term, peace will come to our continent with a Russia that is once again at peace. But the situation I'm describing is just that, and we have to deal with it. So, in this world of danger, to remain a spectator would be madness. Without further delay, we must take decisions for Ukraine.
C'est pour cela que le chemin qui mène à la paix ne peut pas passer par l'abandon de l'Ukraine. Bien au contraire. La paix ne peut pas être conclue à n'importe quel prix.
For the security of the French and for the security of Europeans. Ukraine first. All peace-building initiatives are a step in the right direction. And tonight I want to salute them. We must continue to help the Ukrainians resist until they can negotiate with Russia a solid peace for themselves and for us all. That's why the road to peace cannot pass through the abandonment of Ukraine. Quite the contrary. Peace cannot be achieved at any price and under Russian diktat. Peace cannot be Ukraine's capitulation.
De maintenir les équilibres faute de garanties solides. Aujourd'hui, on ne peut plus croire la Russie sur parole. L'Ukraine a droit à la paix et la sécurité pour elle-même, et c'est notre intérêt, et c'est l'intérêt de la sécurité du continent européen. C'est en ce sens que nous travaillons avec nos amis britanniques.
It cannot be its collapse, nor can it be translated into a ceasefire, which would be too fragile. And why? Because here too, we have the experience of the past. We can't forget that Russia began invading Ukraine back in 2014, and that we then negotiated a ceasefire in Minsk. And the same Russia has not respected this ceasefire, and we have not been able to maintain the balance for lack of solid guarantees. Today, Russia can no longer be taken at its word. Ukraine has a right to peace and security for itself.
Elle n'irait pas se battre sur la ligne de front, mais elle serait là, au contraire, une fois la paix signée, pour en garantir le plein respect. Dès la semaine prochaine, nous réunirons à Paris les chefs d'état-major des pays qui souhaitent prendre leurs responsabilités à cet égard.
And it's in our interest and in the interest of the security of the European continent. That's why we're working with our British and German friends and several other European countries. That's why you've seen me bring several of them together in Paris over the last few weeks, and meet them again in London a few days ago to consolidate the commitments Ukraine needs. Once peace has been signed, so that Ukraine is not invaded by Russia again, we need to prepare for it. This will undoubtedly involve long-term support for the Ukrainian army. This may also involve the deployment of European forces. They're not going to fight today. She wouldn't go and fight on the front line, but would be there, on the contrary, once the peace was signed, to guarantee its full respect. As early as next week, we will be convening a meeting in Paris of the chiefs of staff of those countries wishing to assume their responsibilities in this area. It's a plan for a solid, lasting, verifiable peace, which we have prepared with the Ukrainians and several other European partners, and which I defended in the United States a fortnight ago and throughout Europe. And I want to believe that the United States will stand by us. But we have to be ready, should this not be the case, whether or not peace in Ukraine is achieved quickly. In view of the Russian threat I have just described to you, the European states must, to be able to defend ourselves better and deter further aggression. Yes, whatever happens, we'll need to equip ourselves further and raise our defensive stance.
La Commission et le Président du Conseil, nous franchirons des pas décisifs. Plusieurs décisions seront prises que la France proposait depuis plusieurs années. Les États membres pourront accroître leurs dépenses militaires sans que cela soit pris en compte dans leur déficit. Des financements communs massifs seront décidés pour acheter et produire sur le sol européen.
And all for the sake of peace itself, as a deterrent. As such, we remain committed to NATO and our partnership with the United States of America. But we need to do more. Strengthen our independence in terms of defense and security. The future of Europe does not have to be decided in Washington or Moscow. And yes, the threat returns to the East and innocence to some extent. The last 30 years, since the fall of the Berlin Wall, are now over. Tomorrow in Brussels, at the Extraordinary Council meeting between the 27 heads of state and government, the Commission and the President of the Council, we will be taking decisive steps forward.
Sur leur sol, qui sont prêts à davantage coopérer, à réduire leur dépendance à l'égard du reste du monde. Et c'est une bonne chose. L'Allemagne, la Pologne, le Danemark, les États baltes et nombre de nos partenaires ont annoncé des efforts inédits en matière de dépenses militaires.
Several decisions will be taken that France has been proposing for several years. Member states will be able to increase their military spending without this being taken into account in their deficits. Massive joint funding will be provided to buy and produce some of the most innovative ammunition, tanks, weapons, and equipment in Europe. I've asked the government to mobilize all its resources to ensure that, on the one hand, this strengthens our armed forces as quickly as possible and, on the other,
Et à travers les 2 lois de programmation militaire que j'ai décidées et que les parlements successifs ont votées, nous aurons doublé le budget de nos armées en presque 10 ans.
Accelerates the reindustrialization of all our regions. And in the next few days, I'll be getting together with the relevant ministers and industrialists in the sector. The Defense Europe we have been advocating for 8 years is now a reality. This means European countries that are more ready to defend and protect themselves.
Ce seront de nouveaux investissements qui exigent de mobiliser des financements privés.
That produce together the equipment they need on their own soil, that are ready to cooperate more, to reduce their dependence on the rest of the world. And that's a good thing. Germany, Poland, Denmark, the Baltic states and many of our partners have announced unprecedented efforts in terms of military spending.
Elle a, depuis 1964, de manière explicite, toujours joué un rôle dans la préservation.
So, in this time of action that is finally opening up, France has a special status. We have the most effective army in Europe, and thanks to the choice made by our elders after the Second World War, we have nuclear deterrence capabilities. This protects us much more than many of our neighbors. What's more, We didn't wait for the invasion of Ukraine to take stock of a worrying world. And through the 2 military programming laws that I decided on and that successive parliaments have voted for, we will have doubled the budget for our armed forces in almost 10 years. But in view of the threats posed by this acceleration I have just described, we will have to make new budgetary choices and additional investments, which have now become indispensable. I have asked the government to work on this as quickly as possible. These will be new investments that will require the mobilization of both private and public financing, without raising taxes. This will require reforms, choices, and courage. Our nuclear deterrent protects us. It's complete, sovereign, French from start to finish. Since 1964, it has explicitly played a role in preserving peace and security in Europe, responding to the historic appeal of the future German Chancellor. I have decided to open the strategic debate on the protection of our allies on the European continent by our deterrent. Whatever happens, the decision has always been and will remain in the hands of the President of the Republic, head of the armed forces. Controlling our destiny, becoming more independent. We need to work on this both militarily and economically. Yes, economic, technological, industrial and financial independence are essential. We must also be prepared for the United States to impose tariffs on European goods, as it has just confirmed it will do against Canada and Mexico. This decision, which is incomprehensible both for the American economy and for ours, will have consequences for some of our industries. It increases the difficulty of the moment, but it won't go unanswered by us. So, while we prepare to fight back with our European colleagues, we will continue, as I did a fortnight ago, to do our utmost to convince everyone that this decision would harm us all, and I hope, yes, to convince and dissuade the President of the United States of America. All in all, these are times that call for decisions on our agriculture, research and industry, and on all our public policies, unprecedented in many decades. We can't have the same debates as in the past. That's why I've asked the Prime Minister and his government, and I invite all the country's political, economic and trade union forces to join them in making proposals in light of this new context. Tomorrow's solutions cannot be yesterday's habits. My dear compatriots, in the face of these challenges and these irreversible changes, we must not give in to any excesses. Neither the excesses of the warmongers, nor the excesses of the defeatists. Defeatist. France will follow only one course, that of the will for peace and freedom, true to its history and principles. Yes, that's what we believe in for our safety. And that's what we believe in too, to defend democracy. A certain idea of truth, a certain idea of a free search for respect in our societies, a certain idea of freedom of expression that is not the return of hate speech, basically, a certain idea of humanism. That's what we're all about. Our Europe has the economic strength, the power, and the talent to rise to the challenge of these times, and compare ourselves with the United States of America, let alone Russia. We have the means. So we need to act as united Europeans, determined to protect ourselves. That's why our country needs you, and your commitment. Political decisions, military equipment and budgets are one thing, but they can never replace the fortitude of a nation. Our generation will no longer enjoy the dividends of peace. It's up to us to ensure that our children reap the rewards of our commitments tomorrow. Then we'll face it together. Long live the Republic. Vive la France.